All right, Shabbos, say good morning, good morning. Let us begin a really beautiful daf ahead of us today. I want to begin by thanking all of our sponsors. Sorry, let me just pull it up. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Yanki and Eliza Statman, Yitzi and Rebecca Statman, in commemoration of the first yard site of their sister, Menucha Shendel Yehudis Zichron Levracha, Bas David Yosef. To thank Shmuel Rabin Karapkin for dedicating the Shurim this month in commemoration of the 25th yard site of Rabin's mother, Melanie Solomon, Pesa Mira Bas Chaim Zichron Levracha. And to thank our week of learning sponsors, Zevi and Shoshi Daniel, Leili Nishmas Rafael Yaakov Ben Avram Zichron Levracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the families in Nechama. Rabbi, say with that, let us begin. Today's daf is daf Tes 9. We are up to Baruch Hashem, again, the top of Tes Samad Aleph. Beautiful. And I want to say we begin today with a Mishnah. So let's get right into it. The Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah writes, Kinidre Rishaim Nadar. So we'll say, listen to this. Very interesting case. Let's say, and now again, we'll say, as often happens in Shas, but I think it's even a bit more acute in Nedarim, Mishnah will make a statement. The statement is not immediately understandable, and so we'll need the Gemara to go ahead and kind of fill in the blanks a little bit and teach us what the Mishnah is actually trying to convey. So I'll say, so in this case over here we have the following situation. Kinidre Rishayim. A person goes ahead and takes a neder, and the way he formulates his neder is, my neder should be Kinidre Rishayim. This should be like the vows of the wicked. So what does that mean? So I'll say, take a look at the Ran for just a moment. The Ran on the left-hand side writes as follows. He says, Hachmas nisin nami perusha diyadosi. So I'll say, first of all, the Ran sets the table for us. This Mishnah is a continuation of the discussion of yados. Truncated partial declarations. Okay? So I'll say, umefarshina b'gimara. So again, the Ran's giving us already a little bit of coming attractions. This is what the Mishnah means to say. Dim Amar Kinidre Rishaim Hareni. I will say this is the formulation, right? I say Kinidre Rishaim Hareni. Like the Nedarim of the wicked, I will be. And I will say now, we're going to see Vahaya Nazir over Lefanav, and in that moment when I'm saying it, a Nazir walks in front of me. So I will say, so how do we interpret that statement? Like the vows of the wicked, Hareni, I am what? A Nazir. Now, remember, this is a yad, it's a partial declaration, but because I'm saying this as a Nazir walks in front of me, we look at this as an acceptance of a neder Naziros. Okay, again, we have still some information to fill out over here. So, Haru Nazir, V'chenim Amar Kinidre Rishaim Alai. So I'll say similarly again, if a person says the formulation, so we'll say, we're going to see these different formulations. There's Kinidre Rishaim Hareni. I am like the neder of a Rasha, the nedarim of a Rasha. And again, in that moment, a Nazir is walking in front of me. We look at that as the acceptance of Nazirus. Case number 2, the Ran, by the way, the Ran is a big like party pooper, right? I'm saying he gives away the whole Gemara right here in the first line. But again, it's necessary because we'll appreciate the Mishnah a little bit, but we'll see this all again. That's case 1. Case number 2 is V'chein Imamar Kinidre Rishaim Alai. If a person says, like Nidre Rishaim upon me. Everybody say, what does that mean? Chayiv Karban. Ultimately, again, a person is accepting upon himself sacrificial obligation. And it's a case of where there's an animal in front of me. So case number 2 is Knidre Rishaim Alai. Like the neder of Rishaim is upon me. There's an animal right in front of me. We interpret that statement to mean what? I'm accepting upon myself the obligation to bring a carbon. That's case 2. Good. And case number 3, V'cheinami im Amar Kinidre Rishaim Heimenu. And I will say, third case is we're going to say that a person says, like the vows of the wicked, Heimenu. Heimenu means from me. And I will say, we interpret that as Shelo Ochal, as actually a Shavua, as an oath not to eat something, presupposing that what? V'haya kikar munach lefanav. Talking about a case where there's a loaf of bread in front of me. Good. So we'll say these are the 3 cases, what we call Kinidre Rishaim. Kinidre Rishaim Alai. That'll be a case of a Nazir. Kinidre Rishaim Chayiv, or Kinidre Rishaim, right, I'm sorry. The first one is Kinidre Rishaim Hareni, that's Nazir. Kinidre Rishayim Alai, that's carbon, and Kinidre Rishayim Hemeni, that's going to be a Shavua not to eat. All supposing that in case number one, there's a Nazir walking by, in case number two, there's an animal in front of me, and in case number three, there is a loaf of bread in front of me. Those are the three cases. Again, we're going to repeat this all in the Gemara, but the Ran goes on and he says as follows. Ki Amar Kinijay Rishayim. They both say, fine, now we've outlined the three cases. What don't I know? I don't understand what the lashon of Kinijay Rishayim means. What does this mean, like the vows of the wicked? What is that talking about? Listen to what he says. Shahari Rishayim, Darkon Lido B'chol Elu. See, I will say, Rishayim make Nedarim all of the time. They make Nedarim. I will say again, we're going to talk about this idea, about how we view Nedarim, but Rishayim are much more flippant in their making of Nedarim. Omipnei she'en roi lasos came, Karilu Nidri Rishayim, Shai Rishayim Heim La'osa Davar Kain Yiraba'ana Einai. So also we're going to see that Rishayim take a very flippant approach to Nedarim. So when a person says Kinidre Rishayim, what he's doing is he's making a neder. Just like Rishayim make Nedarim, so I'm making a neder as well. Kinidre Rishayim, again, Hareini, Kinidre Rishayim Alai, Kinidre Rishayim Hemeni. Ultimately, again, three expressions of yados. One for Nazir, one for Karban, one for a Shvua not to eat. Beautiful. So we'll say back to the Mishnah. Kinidre Rishayim. So now we'll say Kinidre Rishayim Nadar. So what the Mishnah says is, if you use this formulation, Kinidre Rishayim, you've made a neder. Why? Because Kinidre Rishayim is a proper yad. And therefore we'll say, what does this yad affect? Ben Nazir, it could create a neder Nazirus. Karban, it could create sacrificial obligation. Or Shvua, or it could create an obligation for Shvua. Good. We'll say now, again, let's say it reads beautifully. Once you have the Ran, so the Mishnah reads beautifully. Without the Ran, no idea what's going on over here. With the Ran, I'm well versed in Mishnah Tesla Medal. Weiter. So Kinidre Ksherim. We'll say what happens if a person says Kinidre Ksherim, right? I want to use this partial like the vows of the righteous. Rabbi say, so what happens? Lo Amar Klum. Rabbi say, why Lo Amar Klum? Why is such a statement meaningless? Why? Because the righteous don't make Nedarim, as we're going to see. Right? In general, righteous people abstain from going out and making Nedarim. Therefore, such a statement is halachically meaningless. However, kinidvosam, if at the end of the day, ultimately, again, I say kinidvosam, like the nidavas of the righteous, then what? Then ultimately, again, neder, ultimately such a formulation will work, benazir ubekarban, and could create a neder nazirus, and also could create sacrificial obligation. Then I will say, what's interesting to note about this is as follows. So what we see from the Mishnah, by the way, is that the wicked make Nedarim, are flippant about Neder making, and therefore Kinidre Rishayim is actually a valid yad. The righteous are careful with making Nedarim, don't make Nedarim. Therefore, if you say Kinidre Tzadikim or Kinidre Ksherim, invalid statement. But what tzaddikim do make is an adava. And I will say, we'll get about in this Gemara, but just one word. Was there a neder and an adava? An adava is also a form of neder. Right? It's also a form of neder. Yet for some reason, again, so tzaddikim or ksherim don't make nedarim, but they do make nidre nidava. So if you say kinidve tzaddikim or kinidve or say kinidvosam shal ksherim, that is a valid yad. So kinidre ksherim invalid yad, kinidvosam or kinidvos ksherim is a valid yad. Why that distinction? We'll have. We could get into it now, but we'll get into it in the Gemara a little bit. Good. So Rabbi says, let's go weiter. So the Gemara says as follows. So says the Gemara, V'dilma. So we'll say we're going back to the first case, right? So the first case of the Mishnah was kinidre rishaim is a valid yad, and if that creates a neder. So we'll say what's interesting is as follows. The Gemara is presupposing that the lashon you're using is kinidre rishaim. That's it. And the Gemara thinks that because once again, remember again, like I said, we had the Ran already, so we've worked through this already. But when you read the Mishnah, all the Mishnah says is kinidre rishaim neder. You go ahead and you use this truncated statement, like the vows of the wicked, and that's a valid neder. Which the Gemara says, why? V'dama harika amar kinidre rishaim lo nadarna. Maybe a person is saying that I'm not going to make a neder like the wicked do. Maybe that's what he's saying. In other words, the statement, or it's not even a statement, the phrase of Kinijay Rishayim is such an open-ended statement. So the Mishnah is interpreting Kinijay Rishayim ultimately again to mean the actual taking of an eder. The Gemara says maybe it actually means Kinijay Rishayim, I'm not going to be like a Rasha, and I'm not taking an eder. To which the Gemara says, no. The Dilma Halikamar Kinijay Rishayim lo nadarna, Amushmuel, no. What's the case? Ba'omer Kinijay Rishayim Hareini Alai Vehemenu. Oh, okay, so I'll say we saw this already. So now what's the case? The case is you're not just saying Kinidre Rishayim, rather there's three cases. I'm saying either Kinidre Rishayim Hareini, I am like Nidre Rishayim, or the Nidre Rishayim should be upon me, or Kinidre Rishayim like the Nedar Rishayim from me. I'm using one of those three formulations. So I'll say, what do each of those formulations mean? Here we go. Hareini Nazir Alai. Hareini bin Naziros Alai. So the Gemara says, Bekarban Hemenu, Bishvua Hareini. So I'll say, so again, so now if we play this out over here, if I say, Kinidre Rishaim Hareini, right, like the Nedarim of a Rasha I am, that is interpreted as Neder Naziros. I say Kinidre Rishaim Alai, that's interpreted as Karban, an obligation to bring a Karban. Kinidre Rishaim Hemenu, like a Neder Rishayim from me, that's interpreted as a Shvuah. And I will say, I want to point out that last case is most intriguing because here you have a fascinating case of a Lashon of a Neder, which ultimately results in a Shvuah, which is fascinating, right? I say, Kinidre Rishaim from me, we interpret that to mean a Shvuah, an oath not to eat something. So the Gemara goes through this. We'll say, Hareini Naziros. Now, one second. I don't understand. I will say, remember again, we saw the Ran already, so we know how this all shakes out. So forget the Ran for a little bit. So the Gemara thinking, so no problem. I already forgot the Ran a long time ago. Right, so now listen to this. So the Gemara says like this. So I'll say, so now understand. We're evolving. The Mishnah started with a statement, Hareini Nazir. The Mishnah started with a statement, Kinidre Rishayim. That's how we started. Now we'll say, the Havamina, that's the whole statement. Now the Gemara says, no. The statement is, Kinidre Rishayim Alai. And what does that mean? Naziros. So the Gemara says, why does that mean Naziros? So the Gemara says, maybe it means, Hareini Naziros, Dilma, Hareini Betainis Kamar. I'll say, why do you interpret that as an acceptance of an Neder Naziros? Maybe what the guy is saying is, Kinidre Rishayim Hareini is the acceptance of a fast, of a tainus. Haibio means a Naziros. To which the Gemara says, here we go, Amar Shmuel, Kishahaya Nazir over Lefanav. Oh, what's the case? The case is where I say, Kinidre Rishayim Alai, at the moment that what? A Nazir is walking right in front of me. A Nazir is walking right in front of me. Or Abosai again, Bekarban, Hemenu B'Shvuah, which is like Shar Nazir over the Fanav. Good. So the Gemara says, so Abosai, so that's the case. The case is where, so Abosai, all of these cases are only meaningful if what? If there's the object, which clarifies the meaning of the partial declaration. So if I say, Kinidre Rishayim Alai, and the Nazir is walking in front of me, between the Yad and the Nazir, I understand that what I'm making is a Neder Naziros. Or for example, Alai Bekarban. I say Kinidre Rishayim Alai, and there's an animal in front of me. It's understood as I'm making a Neder to bring a Karban. Or Heimenu, once again, last case, Kinidre Rishayim Heimenu, like the Neder of a Rasha from me, we interpret that as what? A Shvuah. Rabbi say, because what's the case? Right, the case where there's a loaf of bread in front of me. So Rabbi say, so now we've caught up with the Ran. Right now, what the Ran explained to us in the Mishnah, now we've seen in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, 1 second. But in that last case, Dilma Heimenu Da'achil Naka'amar. Maybe Rabbi say, I'm taking a Shvuah to eat. How do you know that it's a Shvuah not to eat? In other words, Rabbi says, so we're interpreting Kinidre Rishayim Heimenu as a statement, right? As a statement not to eat. Maybe not. Maybe Kinidre Rishayim Heimenu is a statement to eat. Amarava Da'amar hemenu shelo ochal. Okay, what's the case? I say, Kinidre Rishaim Hemenu Shelo Ochal. The Gemara says, hey, that's not a yad anymore, right? That's a pretty explicit statement. So the Gemara says, Ihachi Maila Memra. Okay, so what's there to say? To which the Gemara says, listen to this. Mao detema halomapik shvua mipumei. The Gemara says, so understand, there's two different chidushim happening. The first two of the three cases are legitimate yados. The third case, and create nedarim. The third case creates what? What's the novelty in the third case? So the novelty in the third case is not the yad. The novelty in the third case is that through the verbiage of a neder, I'm actually creating what? A shvua. That's the chiddush. And therefore, again, I would have thought that because I have not articulated a shvua, you can't create a shvua without a formal shvua articulation. Therefore, the Gemara says, Kamash Malon Hadain. Kamash Malon, I can. Kamash Malon, the chiddush of Rabbi is that there is a case which is fascinating, that through the articulation of a yad, I can actually go ahead and create a shvua. Therefore, Rabbi say, if we bring this all together, here is what the Mishnah has introduced us to. The Mishnah is using another case of a yad. What's the case of the partial declaration? Kinidrei Rishaim. Kinidrei Rishaim is a valid yad articulation, except by itself it's not. Right? Kinidrei Rishaim needs what? It needs a modifier. We've been introduced to three modifiers, right? What are the three modifiers? Right? Hareini, I am, alai, upon me, and hemenu, right? From me. Now both say the three modifiers by themselves are not enough either. What else do you need? You need an object to clarify the modifier. So therefore I will say, if we put this all together, case number one is Kinidrei Rishaim alai creates a neder nazirus as long as what? I need a nazir, right? Case number two, Kinidrei Rishaim alai creates an obligation to bring a carbon as long as what? There's an animal right in front of me. And the last case, Rabbi say, is what? Kinidrei Rishaim Hemeni. Kinidrei Rishaim Hemeni. And Rabbi say, or Hemenu. Now, the chiddush of now it turns out is Kinidrei Rishaim Hemenu Shelo Ochal. Right? Like the Neder of Rishaim, I abstain that I will not eat. Somebody says, okay, that's no longer a yad. You're right. What is that? That's a shvua. The chiddush in case number three is that you could use a declaration, a yad declaration, in order to create a shvua obligation, which will not force you to abstain from eating that particular loaf of bread. Incredible. Whew, good. That's the first. That's the first section of the Mishnah. Now remember, we transition to the second section. Kinidrei ksherim la'amar klum, kinidvosam nadar. So we'll say now, second section of the Mishnah was like this: if a person uses a yad and he says, Kinidrei ksherim, what's the impact of that statement? Zero. Ineffective. Why? Because the Gemara Mishnah says apparently, ksherim don't make nedarim. But if you say, kinidvos ksherim, like the nedavas of a ksherim, then what? That is a valid yad. Why? Because apparently righteous people, ksherim, don't go ahead and make nedarim, but they do make nedavos. Okay, let's analyze. So man time the shanila bein neder lenedava. So we'll say, as I pointed out to the Mishnah, a nedava, it's very important to understand, a nedava is a form of neder, right? Understand, right? A nedava is a form, sorry, in other words, just what I'll say, I'll give you in the world of karbanos. We're going to illustrate this, but just to highlight this now. In the world of karbanos, you could pledge a neder or a nedava. They're both voluntary offerings. Now we'll discuss the fundamental. I'll tell you the fundamental distinction. No, I'm not going to tell you yet. Right, so I'll say, so again, we'll see what the distinction is, but they're both called voluntary. So it's interesting that the Mishnah is making a distinction here between a neder and a nedava. Literally translated, a neder means a vow, a nedava means a gift. But I just want to point out they're both voluntary vows or voluntary offerings. Yet, so the Gemara says, who is the opinion who makes a distinction between a neder and a nedava? So I'll say, watch this. This is incredible. So this actually helps to shed light also on the previous section on the Mishnah. So mantra, the shanale bein neder lenedava, nema lo Rabbi Meir v'lo Rabbi Huda. It's neither Rabbi Meir nor is Rabbi Huda. Rabbi will say, watch this. This Sanya. This is incredible. The quote over here, the pasuk from Koheles. What does Shalom Melech say? Tov asher lo tidar mishatidar v'lo tishalim. Shalom Melech says, it is better not to vow than to vow and not pay up. right, than to vow and not come through. Okay, it seems like a pretty straightforward statement. So the Gemara says, so now we'll listen to this. So this anya, Tova Shalal Tidar. Now the Gemara says, Tov Mizeh Mizeh. What's even better than both of these things? In other words, so Shlomo Melech says, better not to vow than to vow and not come through on your vow. The Bryce now says, and now what's even better than both of these things? What's even better than coming through on your vow? She'eno noder kol ikr. And Meir says, don't make nedarim. Don't make nedarim. Don't make nedarim at all. See, in other words, yeah, it's better not to vow than to vow and not come through. And even better, what's even better than vowing and coming through and following through is don't vow at all. These words are Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, Tov mizeh, no de mishalim. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. What's even better is what? If you make a neder and what? Come through. So both say, this happens to be a fundamentally yesodistic machlokes. In other words, is making a neder a good thing or not? So Rabbi Meir, so let's work backwards. Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, making a neder is a good thing as long as what? As long as what? You're going to carry through on your promise. Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that making a neder is a bad thing, even if you're going to come through, right? If you're going to follow through, making a neder is a bad thing. You both say. So first of all, now you understand also the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah would seem to reflect the view ultimately of Rabbi Meir that making nedarim in general is a bad thing. Making nedarim is a bad thing. So because that's a bad thing, kinidre rishaim is a valid yad, which is interesting. You both say, just to pause for a moment, almost like b'derech hashkafa. What's the understanding of Rabbi Meir? Right? I understand making a neder and not following through is a bad thing. But why would it be bad to make a neder and follow? Right? I make a neder and I come through. Right? I'm a man of my word. So whenever I make a neder, I come through. Why would Rabbi Meir be against such a model like that? So we'll say, it could be Rabbi Meir saying is like this. What's a neder? What's a neder? Right? Okay, a vow. Why does a person make a neder? Let's analyze this just a moment. Why does a person make a neder? Why? Because they need to push themselves to accomplish something. That's what a neder does. A neder essentially says that I'm creating a framework or creating a situation where I have no choice but to accomplish the stated goal, the stated task, the stated directive. Because now what I've done is I've bound myself halachically. It could be that Rabbi Meir is saying is like this. Why do you need a neder to accomplish your life objectives? Why can't I be enough of a driven person who's able to do what needs to get done without the mechanism of a neder? In other words, the fact that I have to rely on a neder represents a level of personalistic weakness. Because if at the end of the day I was driven enough, if at the end of the day I was motivated enough, I would get done what has to get done without the use of a neder. Having to rely on a neder means there's something deficient inside of me. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, yeah, we all have our weaknesses. And I will say most of us don't get things done unless we absolutely have to get things done. So what the neder does is creates a sense of urgency. So you've got Rabbi Yehuda saying human nature is human nature. People don't get things done even though they need to get things done. Neder creates a deadline. Neder creates an urgency. Neder creates, you can't get out of it. Rabbi Meir says, don't live life like that. Be a self-starter. Be motivated. Be the kind of person who gets things done in life because you should get things done in life and not because there's some halachic mechanism that is forcing you to move yourself forward. It's such a fascinating machlokes, we'll say, in human nature. Good. So we'll say, so therefore, why are we bringing this down? Because if you notice, neither Rabbi Yehuda nor Rabbi Meir make any distinction between neder and nedava, which is interesting. So we'll say, right, you've got Rabbi Meir saying, don't make nedarim. Don't make nedarim. Rabbi Yehuda saying, no, you can make nedarim as long as you're going to come through on them. But no one's making a distinction between a neder or a nedava. To which the Gemara says, to Rabbi Meir. It's not true. The truth is, our Mishnah could reflect even the view of Rabbi Meir. In other words, even Rabbi Meir, who normally says, don't make nedarim at all, could agree with the neder nedava distinction. How so? Amud Beis. Kik am Rabbi Meir beneder. Because when Rabbi Meir says that halacha l'maisa, you shouldn't make a neder, right? Better not to make a neder at all. In other words, it's even better not to make a neder than to make a neder and to come through on the neder. He's talking about a neder. Benedava lo ka'amar. He's not focusing at all on a nedava. He's not focusing at all on a nedava. To which the Gemara says, right, so benedava lo ka'amar. V'hakatani kinidvosam neder. But one second. But it does say that if you use, right in the most, going back to the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah, you second line down from the top, Tesla Beis 9b. So remember again, yet the Mishnah said kinidvosam. If you use the lashon of kinidvosam, right? So if I say kinidvos ksherim, like the nedavas of the ksherim, it creates a neder, right? It creates literally again a neder, but nazir or carbon, and can literally again affect a neder nazirus, or can affect a neder to go ahead and create an obligation to bring a carbon. So we'll say, so you see from here that this lashon is creating a neder. Now we'll say, so again, in Rabbi Meir's worldview, nedarim are not good. Nedarim are not good. So that's what I wanted to mention before. What's interesting about this is when we say that a nedava works, a nedava is a neder. A nedava is a neder. It's a sug, it's a category of neder, but it's still a neder. So the Gemara wants to say, the Mishnah could even reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. Because when doesn't Rabbi Meir like nedarim? That's by a neder. But he's okay with nedava. What? Nedava is a form of neder. So Rabbi Meir's worldview that nedarim are bad. Nedarim are bad. Even if you fulfill them, they're bad. Why would he be in favor of a person making a nedava? To which the Gemara says, Tani nadav benazir uberkarban. What it means is, I will say, so read the Mishnah saying, if a person literally made a nedava by nazir or by karban, it works. It works. Okay, so the Gemara says, well, let's analyze this. Let's analyze this a little bit. To which the Gemara says, Mashna noder delo. So we'll say, let's analyze this a little bit. So now, why is it that ultimately, again, why would there be a resistance to neder and not a resistance to nedava? Why? So the Gemara says, Mashna noder delo, dilma asiba lide takala. Because I will say, the concern ultimately, again, by neder is that a person could come to a stumbling block. Now, we'll say, now what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Left-hand side, fourth line down from the last wide line in Rashi from the top. Dilma asi bele de takala. Tiki amar balashon neder hare elai karban asi bali de takala the avar mishum bal ta'acher. Okay, so we'll say, let's illustrate this for just a moment in the world of karbanos. What's the problem with a carbon? What's the problem with a carbon? So very simple. A person says, hare alai carbon. Person takes upon themselves a carbon, right? A neder bringing carbon. They will say, what's the challenge? Once you go ahead and now you go and take upon yourself to bring a carbon, there's an issue about ta'acher. You may delay, and remember again, delaying in the bringing of your carbonos, but actually, if you remember again from the beginning of the Sechta, delaying in bringing your carbonos actually triggers a double prohibition, a double lav, right? One is a lav against delaying your nedarim, and one is a lav against delaying carbonos, right? But again, the problem, let's focus on neder right now. The problem on making a neder is that whenever you vow to do something, if you delay in the fulfillment of that vow, you are in violation of a biblical prohibition. Okay, so Gemara says, so that sounds like Nedava wouldn't have that problem. The Gemara says, I don't understand. Nedava nami though, Dilma asi beli de takala. They will say, you could have that same problem by Nedava. In other words, they will say, let's play this out. I take a neder to bring a carbon. We said, what's the problem with that? What's the problem? Why don't we like nedarim? Bal ta'acher, you may delay. And therefore, I will say, that's why if a person says, just to go back to the Mishnah, if a person says, kinidre sherim alai. So remember, alai, what does alai mean? Carbon. So a person says, kinidre sherim alai. What's the impact of that statement? Impact of the statement? Invalid. Nothing. Why? What's the problem? Because again, reflecting the view of Ramir, we don't like nedarim. And again, we're concerned that if we let you make that neder, you now have a carbonic obligation. And what? It may result in bal ta'acher. Yet Rabbi said, the same Mishnah also said, if a person says, kinidvos ksherim alai, and there's an animal right in front of me, what's the halacha? Now I've just taken upon myself to bring in a dava carbon. I don't understand. The same bal ta'acher applies to a nedava. right? In other words, Rabbi say, so again, I'm just going to tell you this now, and I'm going to spoil it for you a little bit, just to clarify. What's there seen in a neder and in a nedava? So I'll say we're going to see the fundamental distinction between a neder and a nedava is a neder, a person is identifying a particular animal for a carbon. Actually, I'm not going to say it yet. Let's wait for the Gemara. Let's wait for the Gemara. So I will say, so all the Gemara is trying to point out over here is I don't understand the distinction. In other words, I understand why kinidre ksherim alai does not generate an obligation because we don't like Nedarim. Why don't we like Nedarim? Because a person is setting themselves up ultimately again for a particular biblical prohibition about ta'acher. But if a person says kinidvos ksherim alai, I'm taking upon myself an adava. An adava is also subject to bal ta'acher, to delaying. So how does it work? I will say, here we go. This is absolutely incredibly beautiful and ridiculously moving. So listen to this. This Sanya, listen to this Braisa. Amru al Hillel Azakin. They used to say about Hillel Azakin, get ready for this. Get ready for this. So the Gemara says, before we get to, all right, let me just say this very quickly. I will say, the fundamental distinction between neder and nedava, which is going to come out in just a moment, is a neder is hare alai, versus again, the nedava, which we're going to say is hare zu. Right? We're going to see the fundamental distinction is that the neder, a person, let's say, makes a neder to bring a carbon, he has an obligation to bring an animal. Let's say he had in mind to bring animal A, and animal A died, he still is obligated to go ahead and bring animal B. Versus nedava, where the obligation for the voluntary offering, the gift offering, devolves upon a particular animal. Right? And therefore, if that animal dies, he's no longer obligated to go ahead. So we'll see that distinction play out in just a little bit. So watch this. Here we go. This Sanya, so beautiful. Amra Hillel Zakin. He said about Hillel the elder, Shalom ma'al adam ba'olasal kol yamav. Supposed to listen to this. Hillel, I will say, in general, there's a problem with, right? Imagine the following situation. Right? The Meretz Hashem, we have the third base in the Shulchan Rabbi Yaminu. I have to bring a carbon. So I say, now what do? Right? I go to my backyard. I have a corral, right, with my sheep in there. I pull out one of the sheep. Right? I say, Hare zu chatos, because I'm definitely going to have to bring a chatos. Right? So, right, Hare zu chatos, and I bring it to Yerushalayim. Beautiful. Okay? The problem is, because the animal is consecrated, now there's always the concern about me'ilah. All right, about inappropriate, right, mundane usage of a consecrated item. And I will say, by the way, that could happen so easily. Imagine I'm walking to Yerushalayim, I'm carrying my, we often have like this image that like when Mashiach comes into the Beis Hamikdash, we're going to kind of like revert back to what, so we have like this image, I'm walking in my tunic, right, I'm walking in my tunic to Yerushalayim. So of course it's not going to be like that, right, but I'll have a roof rack, right, and I'm going to put the sheep on the roof rack, right, so I will say, so again, so what's the concern? You can imagine a case of me'ilah that could easily come up with an animal, which is you're walking to Yerushalayim, you put your bag on the sheep. I put my bag on the sheep. Shabbos say, so having the sheep carry my bag, that's me'ilah. So Hillel Azakin came up with a great idea to avoid all me'ilah issues. What did he do? Listen to this. Amro Hillel Azakin, Shalom ma'al adam ba'olasa kol yamav. Hillel was able to create a system where people never committed me'ilah. How so? Mevia kishichulin la'azara umakdisha v'somech ala v'shochta. It's incredible. So Hillel said, don't consecrate the animal until you bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. Brilliant. So simple but brilliant. In other words, bring it to the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Ultimately, again, in its unconsecrated state, consecrate, right? So ultimately, again, go ahead and makdisha, smicha, place your hands upon the animal, shochta, shecht it. Incredible. Sefer Rabbi say it literally only becomes consecrated when? The moment before it's shechted, right? So makdisha, smicha, shochta. That's it. To which the Gemara says, hanicha nedava de karbanos. So we'll say ultimately again that works fine. In other words, so in other words, the Gemara is suggesting over here that halacha l'maisa, if you employ this methodology ultimately of Hillel, I will say you could also go ahead and potentially avoid bal ta'acher. To which the Gemara says hanicha nedava de karbanos. That works fine, assuming that we're talking about a case of nedava of karbanos. Nedava de neziros ma'ika lemeimar. Ultimately, again, what about the Nedava of Nazirus. So we'll say, so now, I understand how you could come up with a case. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, Hillel, Masnisin diktani Nedava mutar, kigon da'avid ki Hillel, dimakdisha ba'asara, desulo asi bali de me'ila. So we'll say, so the Nedava of, so I understand the Nedava case, right? So the Nedava case could also be, I'm not being makdishit until I go ahead and get to the Azara, and therefore again, there's absolutely no problem of Baal Ta'acher, there's no problem of Me'ila. Rashi then goes on and he says, Nedava de Naziros ma'ikal meimar. So we'll say, how is there a Nedava of Naziros? Look at Rashi. Hechi avid de lo leisi li de takala. Diktani nadav ben Nazir de mutar diksherem misnadav ben Naziros. So we'll say, what's the case of Nedava by Naziros? Okay, I understand the Stam Nedava. So we'll say, if I say, literally again, so kinidvos ksherim alai, so right, and there's an animal in front of me, I understand how I could construct the case of Nedava that will not lead to Me'ilah, that will not even lead to Baal Ta'acher. But what's the case of Nazirus? What's the case of Nedava by Nazirus? Nedava de Nazirus ma'ikal meimar. So I'll say, by the way, look at the Ran for just a moment. The Ran now, I'm sorry, we're going to the right-hand side. So Kehilel Azakim, the Ran says, Im Amar al behema hamunachas ba'azara, kinidvas ksherim nadar bekarban, sharek ksherim mevian behemtan la'azara, o makdishin osa kederach shayanoeg Kehilel Azakim. So we'll say, so I just want to point out over here, I just want to point out something very interesting, that according to the Ran, here's how the case works. If I say, kinidvos ksherim alai, so we'll say, what is kinidvos ksherim alai? Essentially, according to the Ran, I'm taking upon myself to bring a carbon like Hillel. What does it mean to bring a carbon like Hillel? Don't consecrate the animal. Bring the animal as chulin to the Azara. And when I'm in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, makdisha, smicha, shochta. And such a neder will work, because ultimately, again, what I'm doing is I'm setting up a nedava the way that tzaddikim, the way that ksherim would offer up a nedava. Beautiful. So I'll say, good. So I'll say, here's the problem, right? So now go on the run. Nedava de Nazirus ma'ikal meimar, kilomar, heich ksherim misnad v'nazirus, va'islu mechash doma asabei takala. So we'll say, so now, it's just, okay. So now, we're trying to focus on a bit like this. You're telling me that, oh my gosh, how's it 6:30 already? Okay, so I'll say, so listen to this. So you're telling me like this. You're telling me that the verbiage of kinidvos ksherim works. So kinidvos ksherim alai works to establish sacrificial obligation. So now I understand how that works. How does kinidvos ksherim alai work? I take upon myself to bring a carbon nedava, like who? Like Hillel. Keep it chulin, bring it to the Azara. In the Azara, makdisha, smicha, shchita. Beautiful. How does it work to bring a nedava of Nazirus? Right? If I say, kinidre, ksherim, alai, or hareini, and now there's a Nazir walking in front of me, how does that work? Or to bring carbon, how does that work? To which the Gemara says, here we go. So, or to bring a carbon Nazir, how does that work? So here we go. So the Gemara says, another incredible Gemara. How's like Shimon HaTzadik? We'll say, what does Shimon HaTzadik say? The Sanya, listen to how beautiful this is. Amar Rabbi Shimon HaTzadik. Rabbi Shimon HaTzadik said as follows, Miyamai lo achalti asham nazir tameh. So let's listen to this. Shimon HaTzadik said, in all of my life, I never ate from the asham of a nazir who became tameh. Now we'll say, now what is this talking about? This is a guy who's a nazir who accidentally becomes tameh, right? Someone dies, right, in his Dalar Amos. So we'll say, what's the halacha of a nazir becomes tameh? What's the halacha? He brings an asham, a sin offering, and then what? Starts the whole thing again. Shimon HaTzadik said, I never ate from the asham, he was a Kohen, I never ate from the asham of a nazir who had become tameh. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi is right across on the left-hand side. Lo achalti asham nazir tameh. The nazir shemitame maybe asham, the achar kach moni yemei nazirus acher. So remember again, nazir becomes tameh, brings in asham, and then starts all over again. And Shimon HaTzadik is saying, Ume osa asham lo achal. I never ate from such an asham. Ela pamachos, except for one time. Ela pamachos. So listen to this. Pamachos, ba adam echad nazir min adarom. One time, ultimately, there was a man who was a nazir, came from the south of Eretz Yisrael. V'ra'isiv, and I saw Shuyefeinai, he had beautiful eyes. V'tov roi, was such a handsome young man. Ukivotzosav shaduros lo taltalim, and he had beautiful curls, beautiful hair, beautiful hair. So I'll say, so Shimon Tzadik sees this guy, and this guy had made a neder naziros. So now he was completing his neder naziros. He had come to the Beis Hamikdash to what? To offer up his korbanos and what? Shave, right? Shave his head. So Amarti lo b'ni, mara isa lahashchis es sa'arecha zehana. So Shimon Tzadik says to the young man, you're so handsome. You have such beautiful hair. Why did you decide to take upon yourself a neder naziros and destroy this beauty? I will say, get ready for this story. So the young man said, I'll tell you, Rabbi, I'll tell you the story. I am a shepherd for my father, right in our town. At one time I went to draw water from the spring for the flock, for myself. And I saw my reflection in the water. Upachaz alai yitzri. And I saw how handsome I was. And my yitzhara wasn't sighted. I said to myself, with these good looks, I could do a lot of damage, right? With these good looks, I could have so many opportunities for illicit things. Ubikesh litardani mina olam. And I will say, my yitzhara literally again wanted to remove me from the world, which is Lashon. My Yitzhara wanted to totally derail any type of positive dynamic activity. Amarti lo, I said to my Yitzhara, Rasha, incredible. I said to my Yitzhara, you Rasha, lama atam iska'e ba'olam she'eno shalcha. How dare you become arrogant in a world that is not yours? Right? You want me to take advantage of all the illicit, carnal pleasures of this world. This world doesn't belong to you. This world belongs to the Ribbono Shel Olam. He says, so, lama atam isga'e ba'olam she'eno shalcha, b'mishu asit lios rima vitolea. Furthermore, how dare you go ahead and cause the body to become arrogant? The body, which one day is going to become dust and consumed by worms. So I will say, this is the conversation that this young man has with his own Yitzhar. I was like, can you imagine the personalistic strength that a person has to have, recognizing that, again, any sin he wanted is at his fingertip, right? Any pleasure he wanted is literally at his fingertips. And he says to Yitzhar, Rasha, stay away from me. So this young man says to Shimon HaTzadik, he says, Ha'avoda sha'agalchecha l'shamayim. So he says, and again, he attributed, again, his beautiful hair, part of his good looks. He said, I swear by Hashem that ultimately, again, I'm going to shave you for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I will say, so that's how this young man became a Nazir. He became a Nazir, which I will say, by the way, I'll just point out, in general, there is, we'll see Maseches Nazir, but there is a fundamental machlokes in general about Neder Nazirus. Is becoming a Nazir a good thing, not a good thing? So it's a fundamental machlokes, but one thing is clear, which is, when does one become a Nazir? One becomes a Nazir to combat the carnal wants and urges of this world. So we'll discuss, the Torah juxtaposes the halachos of Nazir to Sota. Sota is a woman who has gotten herself in trouble. Whether she committed adultery or not is unknown. But one thing is clear, which is she's gotten herself in some level of trouble. The Gemara understands that people get themselves in trouble because of alcohol consumption. Therefore, again, a Nazir sees Sota. What does he do? He makes a Neder Nazir, abstains from wine. So again, why does this young man become a Nazir? Ultimately, again, because to combat his Yitzhara. So we'll say, so what happened? So listen to this. Miyad. So this is now Shimon HaTzadik talking. Miyad. Amadati unishaktiv al rosho. I stood up and I kissed him on his head. Amarti lo, I said to this young man, Bini, kamocha yirbu nozre nazirus b'Yisrael. Halavai, there should be many more nazirim like you in Klal Yisrael. Halacha kasav omer, about you, the pasuk says, Ish kiyafli lindar neder nazir lahazir laHashem. Ultimately, again, about you, it says, I will say, because the lashon of Nazir is, if a person will articulate, enunciate a neder to become a Nazir, laHashem. So I will say, there are different types of Naziros. There's a regular Naziros, and there's a Nazir laHashem. A Nazir laHashem is a person who does so for the right reasons. So I will say, so therefore, again, before we get into the substance of the story, so ultimately, what's the example? What's the example of Nidvos Ksherim, right? Alai, or Hareini, where a person becomes a Nazir? That's a case of a person who becomes a Nazir LaHashem. So a person who becomes a Nazir l'shem shamayim, a person who becomes a Nazir for the right purposes, a person who becomes a Nazir ultimately again to further and actualize his spirituality, that would be an example of a Nedava that would be again kinidre ksherim. That would, or I should say, kinidvos ksherim, ultimately again would work. So in other words, there's a case of a Nazir, ultimately again that would work for ksherim. So we'll say, so again, that answers, so just to piece it together, we're trying to figure out kinidvos ksherim works. So now I understand kinidvos ksherim works by a carbon. If I do my carbon like who? Like Hillel. Where does it work by Nazirus, right? How can you go out and say kinidvos ksherim Hareini, and a Nazir is walking by become a Nazir? When would that work? That would work if a person has in mind to become a Nazir LaHashem. LaHashem. It would work in that particular circumstance. So I will say, by the way, just before we go on, I'll just mention that there is actually a fascinating minhag. It's a lesser known minhag, but you know, Shimon HaTzadik is buried in Yerushalayim. He's buried in what's the neighborhood? You don't usually go there by yourself. It's right on the road in Yerushalayim that divides East Yerushalayim from the rest of Yerushalayim. I forgot the name of the. I don't think it's Sheikh Jarrah. It's right. There's like a big border police station right there. You make a right. Don't make a right. No, don't make a right. But right, if you're leaving Yerushalayim, like towards to right, you're like if you're taking Kvish Echad like out of Yerushalayim towards go like you make a right to go to the right before you go like to Malaya Dumim. It'll come to me. Okay, what is it? Is it French Hill? No, okay, whatever. It's right by the border. So Shimon HaTzadik, the king of Shimon HaTzadik is there, and I will say it's a whole burial enclave over there. Many have the minhag to do upsharon by the grave of Shimon HaTzadik, which is very interesting. So people normally think about doing an upsharon in Meiror or Shema Yachai. So some have the minhag to go to Shimon HaTzadik. They will say, why did they go to Shimon HaTzadik? It's based on this Gemara. It's based on this Gemara about the hair cutting happening in the presence of Shimon HaTzadik. So quite a fascinating minhag. So I'll say, the Gemara says, I'm maskif. There's more to say on this, but let's get a little bit weiter. Maskif la Rebbe Money. Maishna asham nazir tamei delo achal. So we'll say, let's go back for just a second, right? So what did Shimon HaTzadik say? So Shimon HaTzadik said, I never ate from the asham of a nazir tamei. Yet Shimon HaTzadik, right? So why not? What's wrong? So we'll say this is incredible. Let's finish up with this. He says the asi al chait, because again it comes for a sin. In this case, the sin of becoming impure. Well, if that's the case, kol asham asnami lo lecha da al chait asu. Well, every single asham comes because of a chait, and yet we don't see Shimon HaTzadik abstaining from eating other ashamos, only from an asham nazir. To which the Gemara was incredible. Amalei Rabbi Yonah hainu taima kishein toin nozrin. We'll say is incredible. Why? We'll say, when does a person become a nazir? Let's end with this. When does a person become a nazir? A person becomes a nazir when he has remorse for things that he's done or a lifestyle he's led. Okay, so now I have an introspective moment. I think about my life. I become a nazir. Then what happens? So we'll say, now I become a nazir. What's the problem? Now I'm a nazir. Then I become tameh. We'll say, you know what's going through my mind when I become tameh? I can't believe I did this. Right? 30 days I was able to do. Now it's 30 plus it. I can't. And what happens? A person regrets ever having made the neder nazirus. V'nimtzu mevin chulun la'azara. And it turns out that what? When I bring my asham, I'm bringing chulun la'azara. Now both say, it doesn't literally mean I'm bringing chulun la'azara. But what? Because again, remember, the neder is the neder, even if you have remorse by the nazirus. But lamaisa, I have second thoughts about the nazirus. So Shimon HaTzadik did not want to eat a carbon that a person had second thoughts. So we'll stop over for today. We're going to pick up with this last piece about Shimon HaTzadik and also get a little bit more into the Shimon HaTzadik story tomorrow. We'll say, incredible Gemara to come. Shkoyach. All right, have a great day, everyone. Test, test.